I remember the autumn of 2016 with a clarity that feels both sharp and haunting. The air was cooler, the days shorter, and there was an unsettling tension that seemed to seep into every shadow. The clown craze had started as a bizarre and unsettling series of sightings across the country. Clowns standing ominously by forests, lurking near schools, and wandering through neighborhoods at night. Most people dismissed them as pranks, but for me, it became a living nightmare. My name is Alex, and I was 24 at the time, living alone in a small, nondescript apartment on the edge of a quiet suburban town. My job as a freelance graphic designer often kept me up late into the night, with the only sounds being the click of my keyboard and the occasional car passing by outside. It was a mundane existence, but I enjoyed the solitude. The first time I saw him was on a Tuesday night in mid-October. I had stepped out onto my balcony for a breath of fresh air, my eyes lazily scanning the darkened street below. That's when I saw him, standing under the flickering streetlight across the road. He was tall, his face painted with a grotesque smile, the kind that stretched too wide and too thin to be anything but unsettling. His costume was a gaudy mix of bright colors, the fabric dirty and torn in places. At first, I thought it was some kid playing a prank. I even chuckled to myself thinking about how some people had too much time on their hands, but the longer I watched, the more my unease grew. He was just standing there staring directly at me. The street light flickered again, and for a moment it felt like his eyes were glowing. I quickly retreated inside, locking the door behind me. I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself it was nothing. But that night, sleep eluded me. Every creak and groan of the old apartment seemed amplified, and I found myself jumping at shadows. The next few days were uneventful, and I started to believe that I had overreacted. But then it happened again. This time, it was in the parking lot of my local grocery store. I had just finished shopping, the mundane task providing a brief respite from my mounting anxiety. As I approached my car, I saw him again, leaning against a lamppost at the far end of the lot. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled for my keys. His gaze was fixed on me, that same twisted smile never wavering. I managed to get into my car and lock the doors, my hands shaking as I started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still there, his figure slowly receding into the distance. That night, I called the police. They took my report, but seemed more amused than concerned. Probably just some kids messing around, the officer said. It's that time of year, after all. I wanted to believe him, but the unease gnawing at me wouldn't let go. I started to notice subtle signs that someone had been near my apartment. Footprints in the dirt by my windows. The faint smell of something sweet and rotten in the air. I became hypervigilant, double-checking locks and avoiding going out after dark. One evening, as I sat working on a project, I heard a faint tapping sound. It was so light that at first I thought it was just the wind. But it persisted, rhythmic and deliberate. I followed the sound to my front door, my breath catching in my throat. There, slipped under the door, was a small, crumpled note. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. The paper was dirty and smeared with what looked like grease paint. The message was simple and chilling. I'm watching you. Panic surged through me. I called the police again, but they still didn't take it seriously. We can't do much without more evidence, they said. I felt helpless and alone, my sanctuary turning into a prison of fear. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings became more frequent. He was always there, lurking at the edges of my vision. One night, I saw him in the reflection of my bathroom mirror, standing in the doorway behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. Another time, I woke up to find a clown balloon tied to my balcony railing, swaying gently in the night breeze. My work suffered, my social life disintegrated. Friends stopped coming over, spooked by my stories and the growing paranoia in my eyes. I became a recluse, my world shrinking to the confines of my apartment. But no matter how much I tried to hide, he always found a way to remind me that he was there. The final straw came on Halloween night. The streets were filled with children in costumes, their laughter and excitement a cruel contrast to my terror. I had barricaded myself inside, the curtains drawn tight, every light in the apartment turned on. I sat in the middle of my living room, clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes darting to every shadow. Then I heard it, a scraping sound at my front door. I held my breath, my heart racing. The doorknob rattled, and then the door burst open. He stood there, filling the doorway, his smile wider and more twisted than ever. He stepped inside, his movements slow and deliberate. I screamed and lunged at him with the knife, but he easily deflected my attack, grabbing my wrist with a grip like iron. He leaned in close, his breath hot and foul against my face. "I've been waiting for this," he whispered, his voice a sickening blend of excitement and malice. With a surge of desperation, I wrenched free and ran for the kitchen, but he was faster. He tackled me to the ground, the knife skidding out of my hand. As he pinned me down, his smile never wavered. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of true madness in his eyes. I thought I was going to die, but then, out of nowhere, there was a blinding flash of light and the sound of sirens. The police burst in, tackling him to the ground and pulling him off me. I lay there, gasping for breath, the nightmare finally coming to an end. The clown was arrested and identified as a local man with a history of mental illness. He had become obsessed with the clown craze and had fixated on me for reasons that still remain unclear. The police found a stash of disturbing notes and plans in his apartment, detailing his intent to terrorize me. It took me a long time to recover from that ordeal. I moved to a new city, changed my job, and tried to rebuild my life. But even now, years later, the sight of a clown can send me into a panic. The scars of that autumn in 2016 will never truly fade. A haunting reminder that sometimes the things we fear the most are not just in our minds, but very real and very dangerous.
It was the fall of 2016, and the creepy clown phenomenon was sweeping across the nation like a plague. News reports and social media were flooded with sightings of sinister clowns lurking in unexpected places, their painted smiles hiding a darker intent. What began as a bizarre curiosity quickly turned into an omnipresent threat, a modern urban legend come to life. My name is Sarah, and I was a 27-year-old paralegal living in a small town in Ohio. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and crime was almost unheard of. But the sense of safety I once felt in my community was about to be shattered. It started innocuously enough, with sightings in neighboring towns. Clowns standing on street corners, waving at passing cars, or peering from behind trees. People laughed it off, calling it a prank or a marketing stunt. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept into my thoughts whenever I heard another report. The first time I saw him, it was late at night. I had stayed late at the office, finishing up a brief that needed to be filed the next morning. It was just past midnight when I finally locked up and made my way to my car. The parking lot eerily deserted. As I approached my car, I saw him standing at the edge of the lot, partially obscured by shadows. He wore a tattered clown costume, the colors faded and grimy. His face was painted white, with exaggerated red lips and dark hollow eyes. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly got into my car and locked the doors. I told myself it was just a prank, but the unsettling feeling lingered. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I left the house or the office, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that clown lurking somewhere nearby. It felt paranoid, but the sense of dread was too real to ignore. Then came the notes. The first one appeared on my windshield, a simple piece of paper with a crude drawing of a clown face and the words, "See you soon." I tried to laugh it off, but my hands shook as I crumpled the note and threw it away. More notes followed, left in places where only someone following me would know to leave them. In my mailbox, slipped under my front door, even inside my office desk. Each one was more unsettling than the last, with messages like, "I like watching you," and "You can't hide from me." I went to the police, but they were dismissive. "It's just a prank," they said. "There's no real threat." But I knew better. The fear gnawing at me wasn't something I could simply ignore. One evening, as I was leaving work, I saw him again. This time he was closer, standing at the entrance to the parking lot. His painted smile seemed wider, more menacing. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road watching me leave. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of my old house seemed amplified, my mind conjuring images of that clown breaking in. I kept all the lights on and stayed in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for the dawn to break. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings became more frequent. I saw him everywhere: outside my house, in the parking lot at work, even at the grocery store. He never approached me, just watched from a distance. His presence a constant, suffocating reminder of my vulnerability. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next encounter. I called my friend Lisa, and she agreed to come over and stay with me for a few days. Having someone else in the house made me feel a little safer, but the fear still lingered. On the second night of Lisa's stay, we were watching a movie when the power went out. The sudden darkness sent a jolt of panic through me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the room with a shaky beam of light. Lisa went to check the fuse box, and I stayed in the living room, my heart pounding. Moments later, I heard a scream from the basement. I rushed down the stairs, my phone's flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. There, standing at the bottom of the stairs, was the clown. He was holding Lisa, his dirty gloved hand clamped over her mouth, the other brandishing a large knife. His eyes met mine, and I felt a cold dread wash over me. "Hello, Sarah," he said in a voice that was both sing-song and menacing. "I've been waiting for this moment." I froze, my mind racing for a way to save Lisa and myself. The knife glinted in the faint light, a deadly promise of what was to come. But then, Lisa did something unexpected. She bit down hard on the clown's hand, causing him to yelp in pain and loosen his grip. Without thinking, I lunged at him, using all my strength to knock the knife out of his hand. We struggled, the basement filled with the sounds of grunts and scuffling feet. Lisa managed to break free and scrambled up the stairs to call the police. I fought desperately, adrenaline fueling my every move. Finally, I managed to pin him to the ground, using my weight to keep him down until the police arrived. When they did, they found a man beneath the mask, his face twisted with a mix of rage and fear. He was arrested and taken away, and I later learned that he had a history of mental illness and a fascination with the clown craze. He had been following me for weeks, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The ordeal left me shaken but also grateful. Grateful for Lisa's bravery, for the police's timely arrival, and for the end of the nightmare that had consumed my life. I moved away from that town, seeking a fresh start in a place where the shadows didn't hide clowns, and where I could begin to heal. But even now, years later, the sight of a clown sends chills down my spine. The memory of that autumn in 2016 is a scar that will never truly fade, a reminder that sometimes the monsters we fear are all too real.
The autumn of 2016 is one I'll never forget. It was the year the creepy clown craze took over, transforming an innocent childhood character into a symbol of terror. The first few reports of clowns popping up in strange places seemed harmless enough, almost amusing. But then, the sightings became more sinister, and for me, they became terrifyingly personal. My name is Emily, and I was a 22-year-old college student living in a small apartment just off campus. My days were spent juggling classes, part-time work, and late-night study sessions. Life was busy but fulfilling, at least until the clowns arrived. The first time I saw him, it was a Friday night. I had stayed late at the library, cramming for an upcoming exam. The campus was eerily quiet as I walked back to my apartment, the streetlights casting long shadows on the deserted pathways. That's when I noticed him, standing at the edge of the quad. He was dressed in a clown costume, his face painted white with exaggerated red lips and dark, hollow eyes. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled in my gut. It was probably just a prank, I told myself, some idiot trying to scare people. But the fear lingered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak and groan of the old apartment seemed amplified, my mind conjuring images of the clown standing outside my window, watching, waiting. Days passed, and I convinced myself it had been a one-time encounter, but then the notes started appearing. They were slipped under my door, left on my car windshield, even tucked into my backpack. Each one bore the same crude drawing of a clown face and messages like, "I see you," and "We'll meet again soon." My friends laughed it off, saying it was probably some guy with a crush or just a prankster having fun. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something more sinister. The notes felt like a violation, an invasion of my personal space. One evening, I was leaving my part-time job at a local coffee shop. The streets were dark and empty as I made my way to my car. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in the alleyway nearby. It was him, the clown. His painted smile seemed wider, more menacing in the dim light. Panic surged through me. I rushed to my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock the door. As I finally got it open, I glanced back to see him still standing there, watching me with those unnerving eyes. I slammed the door shut and sped away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That night, I called the police. They took my statement, but seemed more amused than concerned. "Probably just a prank," the officer said. "It's that time of year." I felt a mix of frustration and fear. No one seemed to take it seriously. The sightings continued. I would see him in the distance, always watching. Once, I saw him in the reflection of a shop window as I walked past. Another time, he was standing in the shadows of a parking garage, his eyes following me as I hurried to my car. I started carrying pepper spray, but it did little to calm my nerves. Halloween approached, and the campus was abuzz with parties and events. I decided to stay in, too scared to venture out into the night. My friend Lisa insisted I come to her party, promising it would be a safe escape from my fears. Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping the company would distract me from the ever-present sense of dread. The party was in full swing when I arrived, the house filled with costumed revelers and the sound of music. For a while, I managed to forget about the clown, losing myself in the normalcy of laughter and conversation. But then, as the night wore on, I felt a familiar prickle of unease. I excused myself to get some fresh air, stepping out onto the back porch. The yard was dimly lit, the laughter and music from inside muffled. That's when I saw him again, standing just beyond the fence, his painted face barely visible in the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, the sense of dread overwhelming. Suddenly, the back door swung open, and Lisa stepped out. She saw the look on my face and followed my gaze to the figure beyond the fence. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "It's him," I whispered, my voice shaking. "The clown." Without hesitation, Lisa pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "We need help," she said, her voice steady. "There's a man stalking my friend. He's dressed as a clown, and he's been following her for weeks." The police arrived quickly, but by the time they got there, the clown was gone. They searched the area, finding no trace of him. I gave another statement, and this time they seemed to take it more seriously. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but I knew it was little more than a gesture to placate me. The next few days were a blur of fear and exhaustion. I barely left my apartment, jumping at every sound and shadow. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home. Then, one evening, the phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered it anyway, desperate for any distraction. "Hello, Emily," a distorted voice said. "Did you miss me?" I froze, the blood draining from my face. It was him, the clown. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. "Who are you? What do you want?" I managed to stammer. "All in good time," he replied, a sinister edge to his voice. "We'll see each other soon." The line went dead, and I was left standing there, trembling. I called the police again, but there was little they could do. The calls were coming from a burner phone, untraceable. The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. The final encounter came on a cold, rainy night. I was alone in my apartment trying to study when I heard a noise outside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again. Footsteps on the porch. I grabbed the pepper spray and edged towards the window, peeking out through the curtain. There he was, standing just outside, his painted smile barely visible in the dim light. He raised a hand and waved, a slow, deliberate gesture that sent chills down my spine. I backed away, heart pounding, and dialed 911. "He's here," I whispered. "The clown, he's outside my apartment." The operator assured me that help was on the way, but the minutes felt like hours as I waited. The footsteps moved to the door, and then I heard a scratching sound, like nails on the wood. I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the pepper spray, every muscle in my body tense. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as the door was kicked open. The clown stepped inside, his eyes gleaming with malevolent glee. "Time to play, Emily," he said, his voice a twisted sing-song. I sprayed the pepper spray directly into his face, and he screamed, stumbling back. I ran past him, out the door, and into the night, my only thought to escape. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy and unsteady. The police arrived just in time, their sirens blaring as they pulled up. The clown was arrested, his face red and swollen from the pepper spray. It turned out he was a former student from the college, someone with a history of mental illness who had fixated on me for reasons that were never fully understood. The ordeal left me shaken and scarred, but I was grateful to be alive. I moved to a new city, far from the memories of that terrifying autumn. But even now, years later, the sight of a clown fills me with a deep, primal fear, a reminder of the nightmare that once haunted my every step.